Welcome back, ladies and gents. In this video, I talk with one of the world's leading sports psychologists, Dan Abrahams, about how you can develop a mindset to take your game to the next level. Dan has worked with some of the best players and clubs from around the world, with the likes of Anton Ferdinand, Yannick Bolasie, Fulham, QPR, West Ham, to name just a few. Dan is also the author of 3 football psychology books, Soccer Tough, Soccer Tough 2, and The Soccer Brain. And he also has an online academy where he helps to educate players, parents, and coaches on how to develop their mindset. So if you or your players struggle to perform because of nerves, negative self-talk, or maybe the lack of focus, you are really going to love this video. So let's dive into it. Hi guys, and welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Today I am honoured to be joined with probably one of the world's leading sports psychologists and author, Dan Abrahams. Dan has worked with elite athletes across various different sports, including England rugby, England golf, top level teams like QPR, West Ham, Derby County. I believe my beloved Spurs as well are up there as well. So Dan, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for giving up your time. I know you're a busy man, so I really appreciate you coming on today.
No problem, Elliot. I'm delighted to hear you're a Spurs supporter, because I grew up a Spurs supporter as well. Although, as I always say, growing up in the 90s, late 80s was okay, but 90s was pretty dismal, as I'm sure you'd appreciate as a Spurs fan. So, but
it's been a painful experience.
a little bit, but it's good to be talking to you today. Thanks
very much. Did you manage to watch the game last night at all?
I didn't watch it. I follow. I tend to, it's funny because my life is so immersed in sport, and especially football, soccer. I'm not necessarily somebody who spends enormous amounts of time on, say, Sky Sports here in the UK watching it. I tend to try to get away from the game, and but I certainly follow it massively, and it's just extraordinary at the moment. I mean, yesterday, just bizarre results. I mean, Spurs winning 6-1 at United, Aston Villa winning 7-2 against Liverpool. And actually, I wrote a mini article on it this morning. I write a LinkedIn post every single day, and I just about basically players playing behind closed doors, so having no crowd, and how it's arguably freed them up. And I say arguably because that's not going to be the truth for every player, but the conversations I'm having behind the scenes is that, a lot of them actually feel like they're playing freer and more on the front foot. Now they don't have the pressure of a crowd around them. So it's an extraordinary thing, and something I think coaches have to be mindful of and players have to recognize. So it's an interesting landscape right now.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting to hear that as well. There's, that's people talking about, or the players talking about that. So I guess a good place to probably start is to maybe take a step back, and I'll hand it over to you, because I'm sure I didn't do you any justice whatsoever with my intro. And maybe for the people that don't know about you or follow you or anything, you could maybe give a better view of who you are, how you got to where you are, and what it is that you do and have done.
Sure. So I'm a former professional golfer. I played on the mini tours around the UK and a little bit in Europe. Never quite got onto the full main tour, and I wasn't really going to be a good enough golfer necessarily to do so, although the mental side of the game really held me back. And I saw a few psychologists, sports psychologists, and became really interested in that side of things. And I finished playing, started coaching, and my interest and love for the psychological side of sport, not just golf, but sport in general, increased, broadened. And so I decided, as I was coaching the game, I went to university, did a degree in psychology, master's in sports psychology. And when I finished, I had a choice to make. Do I stay as a golf coach with those extra qualifications, or do I become a full-time registered sports psychologist? So I chose the latter. And over the last 15 years, I've worked across a range of sports, but I would very much say I've specialized in golf and football, soccer. And, within soccer, I've got involved with non-league soccer 15 years ago here in England, got to learn the language of the game, the specific challenges that players face, because I think that's one thing that's important to consider as a sports psychologist is every single sport has its own context, its own language, its own challenges, its own nuances, I suppose. So I got involved at non-league, really had a great education there, and it snowballed from there, and started to get involved with some players at West Ham, Carlton Cole, Anton Ferdinand, various players there, Junior Stanislas, as I say, it snowballed. And I suppose over the last 15 years, I've worked with players probably from every single 92 league club in England. I've worked with a number of teams. You mentioned a few: West Ham, QPR, Derby County, Fulham, Brighton, Bournemouth. I've worked with some teams that I had confidentiality agreements with, so I can't name. I've worked with a lot of very high-profile coaches, managers, if you like. And I suppose, I've written 3 soccer psychology books. And I've really tried to, my passion is to demystify this side of the game for players and coaches and parents as well, and help players and coaches work together on this side of things. So I've built up a reasonable reputation, I suppose, within global soccer, of somebody who people like to speak to about this, whether that's a positive or whether that's just that I'm not intelligent enough to make it complicated. I don't know, but anyway, so that's that to me in a nutshell.
Yeah, perfect. That's brilliant. So I guess somewhere a good place to start is, well, a lot of guys in our network, we have a lot of people starting out on their journey, I guess, younger players as well. And I don't think necessarily even just younger players, but for a player maybe who has never really done any work or has never thought about a mindset or a sports psychology aspect, where's a good place for someone like that to start? Where do you start with those kind of players?
It's a really, really good question, and I think that's a tough one to answer, in as much as everybody's a little bit different. But maybe we can start here. I think it's important for if we break the psychological aspect down in very simple terms to 2 areas: performance and practice, or practice and performance. And I use the word practice actually, maybe replacing training, because I think that term training comes with an emphasis towards fitness. Whereas I think if we go into training, we're going to be involved in rondos, keep balls, small-sided games, 11v11s, etc., etc. It might be better for young players and players of any age to actually perceive it as practice. I'm going into practice. So I think from a practice perspective, I would ask everybody who's tuning in to reflect on their efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to their practice, when it comes to their training, if you like. Are you going in and are you executing at 100% intensity, which is what the industry kind of demands? It's what we maybe across the industry say, that's really good training, that's really good practice. However, what we know is actually real good practice is quality practice, which is actually more than just the intensity in which you're practicing. It's also the focus you bring to the table and the capacity to stretch certain areas of your game. Are you practicing deliberately? Are you practicing on purpose, intentionally? So are you going into practice with 1 or 2 things on your mind that you want to improve upon? Okay. Are you another term we might use here is desirable difficulty. A desirable difficulty. Are you creating a desirable difficulty for yourself? As in, let's say I want to work on my positioning, my body shape, my first touch relative to my body shape. I can start to add little things in there, which makes it tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher for me to be able to accomplish these little tasks. I think that's important. You've got to be able to stretch yourself. You've got to visit that ugly zone, if you like. So what I would say is set a few goals, set a few objectives going into your training session about what you specifically want to improve. Don't just rely on your coaches, because your coaches, they've got 20, 25 players in front of them quite often. They can't necessarily accommodate you as an individual. They certainly can't accommodate you as an individual all the time. So if you want to take charge of things, take charge of your career, you've got to be able to take charge of your focus, set your objectives, and go out there, create your desired difficulties, and try to develop your game. So that's the first thing I'd say from a practice perspective. The second area to maybe consider is obviously your performance, or I would say your competitiveness, and we can get more into what this looks like. But I'm always passionate about players having a competitive mental framework, a way of doing competitiveness. Often, over the last 15 years, I've been blessed to sit down with some of the best players in the world, and I can assure everybody online that when I sit down with them, and one question I often ask is, what are you trying to achieve mentally? What are you trying to achieve mentally? When you go on the pitch and you compete, what are you trying to achieve mentally? I would say 99.9% of the time, and this might actually be conservative, 99.9% of the time, I would say people can't actually tell me what they're trying to achieve mentally. This kind of tumbleweed flows across the ground when I ask them that, and there's real silence and a blank look. I think it's vital that players, and again, we can talk about why if you'd like, but I think it's vital that players have a framework, a way of doing the mental side of the game so they can manage themselves on the pitch and everything that's thrown at them. So great practice, good, efficient, world-class practice is vital. And then a real strong competitive mental framework. I think those are the two areas that I would emphasize to any player of any age.
And what would you say, what would be a framework, a competitive framework that someone could work with?
Well, how long have you got with that one? I mean, it's obviously going to be different for different individuals, but look, let me start by answering that question. Let me start answering that question by I suppose why we want a competitive mental framework. You've got to consider the internal and the external. Okay, let's consider the external first of all. The game. The game is complicated. It's a hard game. It's a hard game because it's fast-paced, fast-moving. You've got opponents there, obviously. It's about the relationship between space and ball and players, and you've got to identify those relationships pretty quickly. You've got to be able to deal with all of the challenges being thrown at you there. Then from an internal perspective, what we know is that while soccer works in seconds, right, it takes a second to score a goal, it takes a second to complete a pass, the brain and the nervous system, your brain, your nervous system work in milliseconds. They work in milliseconds. So they trump soccer for speed every single time. Your brain and your nervous system are constantly scanning what's going on around you. So they're throwing out thoughts and feelings all the time, and they're constantly scanning for threats. The opposition player who's playing really well, my teammate who's not playing so well, the fact we're a goal down, the fact that I've made a few mistakes, this is a tough game, the crowd are on my back, the pitch is awful, the referee's making poor decisions. And it's monitoring our internal as well. I feel flat, I feel lethargic, I feel anxious, I feel worried, I feel doubting, I feel fearful, I'm not quite there today. All those kinds of thoughts and feelings that, you know, players tuning in will recognize. So we've got to be able to manage the internal as well. We've got to be able to deal with the external, everything the game throws at us. We've got to be able to manage our internal. The sensations that are emerging in our body, the fact that we can be easily distracted from our game. The internal interacts with that external. So with that in mind, you know, without delivering an overly complicated answer there, that's where I think players have to go on the pitch and have to be able to have something, a mental framework that manages the internal, that deals with the external, that helps us, if I was to sum this up, take charge of ourselves, take control of ourselves, take charge and take control, take charge and take control. And that, as soccer players and probably as sports competitors, we don't necessarily consider. When I sit down and ask a player, what are you trying to achieve? They'll say, well, I want to win and I want to perform well and I want to stay in the team. A striker might say, I want to score goals. A defender might say, I want to keep clean sheets. they tend to revolve around, those objectives tend to revolve around outcomes and performance, key performance indicators. My message to any soccer player is stop. Make your number one objective about self-management, about taking charge and taking control, because of the external and the internal factors at play. So take charge, take control. So you've got to ask yourself, how do I do that? How can I take charge of myself? How can I take control of myself? How can I do that for 95 minutes? And I suppose that does start. So we've got several factors here. So let's move on there. What does that then look like? Taking charge, taking control. Well, that looks like striving to get in your high performance mindset to start with. I think everybody has a high performance mindset. So to consider that, you can think about your high performance mindset when you're playing at your best. Maybe when you're playing at your best. Okay, that's where you might start. When I'm at my best, okay, I'm in my high performance mindset. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What are others seeing when I'm in my high performance mindset? I talk to players about having a high performance mindset and a low performance mindset, and making it their job to stay in their high performance mindset. And one of the techniques I've got that fits into this high performance mindset is a technique I call a game face. Okay. So every player I work with, let's say in the Premier League, because I'm sure everybody tuning in would like to play in the Premier League, I'm helping them start and stay in their high performance mindset. How? Number one, let's have a game face. And a game face is very much about confidence. It's about playing with confidence. It's about being confident on the pitch. It's about having the type of personality you want to have on the pitch. It's the attitude you want to portray. It's your optimal mindset. It optimizes your physical state. Let me give you a story that I suppose illustrates this game face, and then we'll come on to talking about how you establish it. So one of my clients, currently one of my clients happens to be one of the best players in the world, arguably. There's always debate as to who's good, who's not so good. You know what fans like, he's rubbish, man. Why is he, But he certainly finishes high in the Ballon d'Or list, the World Player of the Year. And he happened to play in the Champions League final, 1st of June, 2019. And obviously can't tell you who this player is, but he had a game face going into the Champions League final. And he always has a game face. It's the same game face. We haven't changed it in a couple of years now. And that game face is relentless and dominant. Relentless and dominant. So going into this Champions League final, rather than him having a narrative, an inner story of got to win, got to win, got to win, got to perform, got to perform, got to perform, his inner story became, I'm going to be relentless and dominant. I'm going to be relentless and dominant nonstop. I'm going to be relentless and dominant with every action, every movement, every motion. I'm going to be relentless and dominant with every responsibility within my role. If I give the ball away, relentless and dominant. If my cross goes into row Z, relentless and dominant. If I miss a chance to score, relentless and dominant. If I'm losing a 1v1 battle, relentless and dominant. If we go a goal down, relentless and dominant. If we go a goal up, relentless and dominant. I'm going to be relentless and dominant nonstop. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And he's rehearsing that every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, going into a Saturday game. And so that's his game face. That's his game face. And he makes that a big deal because it's a behavior and set of behaviors. He wants to execute every action relentless and dominant. How did we come up with that? Well, you start thinking about, again, let's come back to you at your best. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And you want to start cutting that back into a couple of key words. And these words have to be action-based words. Alert, alive, lively, sharp, athletic, dominant, relentless, cool, calm, relaxed, focused, belief, and so on and so forth. Notice how they're action-based. You have to be able to act them or enact them. You've got to be able to be them and do them, right? Because that's where we go wrong with mental skill. Mental skill isn't just from the neck upwards. Mental skill is from your head down to your toes up to your head. Mental skill needs to be embodied. You need to be able to be it and do it and act it. So that's how you create a game face, and you can have a lot of fun with a game face. So one of my clients at the moment, who's another good player, he plays at international level for England. His game face is confident, relentless, lion. Confident, relentless, lion. Because sometimes I ask players when they think of their action-based words, when they've got their action-based words, I might ask them to create a model player. So I'll ask them about a model player that they can affix onto those couple of keywords, or an animal like that player did. Leopard, a cheetah, a lion, which sounds a little bit strange, but that's how our brain and nervous system work. They love pictorial metaphors. Another player I work with who I can mention, because I wrote about my work with him in Soccer Tough 2, is Yannick Bolasie, who's had horrific injuries the last few years and has just been released by Everton and is trying to resurrect his career. I feel so sorry for Yannick, but he's still a wonderful player. When we started working together 4 or 5 years ago, actually 5 years ago now, Crystal Palace had just been promoted to the Premier League. And he wanted to feel like a Premier League player. So we created the game face, and his game face is brave, lively, relentless Ronaldo. Brave, lively, relentless Ronaldo. Here's another good story for you. I know I'm going off on one here. Is this okay?
No, carry on. Yeah.
Here's another good story for you. This was going back quite a few years ago. Liverpool were managed by Brendan Rodgers. Yannick was at Crystal Palace playing under Tony Pulis there, and they were going to the last few games, and it was the season that Liverpool were on the verge of winning the Premier League title under Brendan Rodgers. I think there were about 3 games to go. They came to Selhurst Park, and Yannick and I had been talking. We'd been working quite a bit that season together, and he said, Dan, because he tended to have what I call ANTS, ANTS, automatic negative thoughts. So you're nodding your head because I'm sure you've read my books, and I taught in Soccer Tough 2, talk about ants and how we've got to squash the ants, automatic negative thoughts. He'd learnt this by now, and he said, you know what, I'm going to have ants. I'm going to have ants out there because I know that we're not going to see much of the ball. And when you're a winger for Crystal Palace in their first season in the Premier League, you know you're not going to see much of the ball. And that doesn't matter who you are. And even though you know it, you know you're going to have some frustration because you're like, well, I'm not making an impact. It's not happening for me. I'm going to get subbed off, blah, blah, blah. So, and you're trying to excel in your career. So it's this like tug of war, basically. So we talked about, look, yes, let's accept you're not going to see much of the ball. Let's accept you're going to have some automatic negative thoughts out there. You're going to have some ants. You've got to squash those ants pretty quickly by staying BLR Ronaldo, brave, lively, relentless, brave, lively. And a big one for him there was lively, staying lively no matter what, embodying brave, lively, relentless Ronaldo. Anyway, what happened? Liverpool came to Crystal Palace. And yeah, like clockwork, 75th minute, Yannick hadn't done much. They're 3-0 down. But here's the thing. Yannick had been dealing very well with the ants that were arising. Okay, they just emerged. They come up. Oh, it's just not happening. No, come on, stay lively, stay lively, stay lively, stay in this, stay lively. So he was talking to himself out there on the pitch. 75th minute, ball broke up to him. And because he'd been talking to himself, he was ready to anticipate. You know, he was aware of what was going on. He was ready to make good decisions. He carried the ball up the pitch, delivered it in. Striker called Dwight Gale, bang, goal, 3-1. But then went 3-2. And again, ball broke up to Yannick, up the pitch, delivered it in. Someone scored 3-0. He made such a difference, 2 assists, impacted the game. If you're a Liverpool fan, very sorry, but made a difference, dented their chance of winning, which obviously that season, infamously, they didn't go on and win. The famous Gerrard slip up in the next game against Chelsea. Yeah. So making history right there. Yeah, absolutely. Just by squashing ants and being in his game face. BLR Ronaldo. Yeah. So that's an example. Last thing to say here of taking charge, having a framework to take charge, to be in control.
Yeah. So having that game face, a player developing the game face is kind of a way that something we get a lot from players is how to deal with nerves. You know, if they're going for a trial or maybe they're making a debut for a new team, really would be to focus on developing this game face and then just talking to yourself and reaffirming those words you've picked out to kind of squash what you call your ants, your nerves about it, that's, I guess, the way to handle those nerves and to get rid of them, right?
Yeah, and let me give you a little bit of very, very simple science related to this and related to what you've just said. There's a really, really good theory within sports psychology called challenge and threat states. Challenge and threat states. And if you go online and you Google it, you'll get literature, but it's pretty complex literature. If you're interested in it, go for it, but don't worry too much. But what we're saying here and what we're investigating is this notion of how you react to competition. Do you react in a positive way, which is a challenge state? This is a challenge here. Or do you react in a threat state? Okay, this is threatening to me. You're reacting in a negative way. And what we know physiologically is that when we're in a challenge state, our arteries open up, our blood flows around our body more, our oxygen flows around our body. We're quicker, we're faster, we're speedier to make decisions. It makes a difference to the intelligent, which is the front part of the brain, the intelligent part of the brain. What we know in a threat state is the arteries close off, and the opposite happens. And so what we also are investigating and learning is that there are, in very simple terms, three sources of challenge and threat state, whether we go into a challenge state or a threat state. Source number one is self-belief. Source number two is feelings of control. So I believe in myself. I feel in control. And source number three is being in what we call an approach state. So focused on what we want, not on what we don't want. So we're passing positively. We're doing things positively, essentially. So self-belief, control, approach. Self-belief, control, approach. And so that's where I have these tools and techniques to help players when they go into, as you say, a pressure situation, help them feel belief, in control, and focused on what they want. And if we take that Yannick situation, because at that time, if we talk about pressure, at that time, there were a lot of clubs looking at him because he'd had a really good season with Crystal Palace. He obviously ended up going to Everton for 25 million. But there was there was pressure on him. But we helped him find that challenge state by saying, well, what am I in control of? What can I believe in? Well, I believe I can be BLR Ronaldo, brave, lively, relentless Ronaldo. I can do that. I can stay lively. I might give the ball away. I might make it. I can stay. Same with this Champions League player. I can stay dominant, relentless. So I might make a few mistakes, but I can stay dominant, relentless. So control, belief, approach. And that comes down to the techniques that I talk about in my books and online and the stuff we're talking about now.
Yeah. And that would, I guess, kind of cover and help players as well. We have some guys that say, in training, they find training easy or whatever, but it comes to the game day is kind of when they struggle a little bit. I guess whether they're putting pressure on themselves to perform or maybe, I don't know, the fear or whatever it is, but they struggle on game day, whereas in training, they're pinging balls everywhere and beating defenders for fun. So again, it comes back to having that framework, that game face, and focusing on that and not focusing on the pressure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And this is all very individual specific, and it can be complex but not complicated. Okay, so this works in a complex way, but it doesn't have to be complicated, and that's important to say. It's a bit like saying this is really simple. We'll just stay in your game face, squash your ants, but that's not always easy to do. Now, so what I would say to the players listening in is, look, if saying I got to win, I got to perform, if that helps you. Okay, if focused on having a great performance helps you, then fantastic, and so be it. But still have your mental, look at exploring your high performance mindset. your challenge state, if you like. I use the term high performance mindset. The science might say challenge state. Okay, so still explore that. There's nothing wrong with having the narrative around, I want to be 8 out of 10. I want to be 9 out of 10. If that helps you, it's what helps you. What I found in my work is that the vast majority of players, when they start to explore this, actually getting away from performance and being more into just having a narrative around my job on the pitch is to execute every responsibility within my role in my high performance mindset, my challenge state, my high performance mindset. I'm going to start and I'm going to stay there no matter what. That's a better narrative, a more adaptive narrative. And a big part of this is, I must say, saying to yourself, look, the reality is there's going to be some days whereby a 6 out of 10 is going to be the best I can do on the pitch. I'm saying a scale of 1 to 10 because that's how often we judge performance. You have to be able to, let's go back to this Champions League player. He doesn't dismiss the notion of having a 6 out of 10 game and what I would call an average game. What we try to eliminate are the 4s and the 5s, the very poor and the poor. And the worst way be average. And even then, on some days, that can be difficult to do. If you've got poor performing teammates, if you've got a really good opposition, combine that if you yourself feel a bit wake up and your mood is a bit lethargic and flat, that's going to be a tough day. And some days 6 out of 10 is the best that you can do. Some days you can't eliminate a 5, but that's not being negative. What we don't want to do necessarily is get ourselves into a position and go, well, it's got to be 9 out of 10, it's got to be 8 out of 10. That would be a disaster if it's not. We've got to be able to rationalize that a little bit more. And that's where the key is. Let's come back again to simplifying this. Get to know what your high performance mindset is, your HPM, your high performance mindset. In science, your challenge state. Aim to start there. Aim to stay there no matter what you do on the pitch. If you do that, you'll find that you'll be more consistent. You'll high perform more consistently, and you'll be able to do that under pressure. And so coming back to those players who go, well, I do very well on the training pitch, but not so well on the game day pitch. I think that often starts, in my experience, with the story we tell ourselves and the objectives we have going into a game. That objective tends to be too much towards, I've got to perform. If we start to go, hey, really, in many respects, forget the performance. I know what an 8 out of 10 game looks like. I know what the responsibilities within my role are. I know what the head coach wants from me. So I can't force that. I've just got to be ready to be in my high performance mindset. I've got to be ready to be in my game face. I've got to be ready to squash any ants, or at least turn down the volume of ants out there. I've got to be ready to stay in my HPM. And I've got other techniques that I use to help people start and stay there. But that's and it's a very different philosophy, Elliot, as compared to the traditional, well, come on, you've got to go and do it, and you've got to force that performance, and no, stop. Don't think that's true.
You kind of mentioned it earlier where you spoke about the coaches and saying the players need to kind of take their responsibility because coaches they've got a whole squad to worry about rather than an individual. But what can a coach do in their sessions to help the individual, or without being, I'm assuming not spending too much time on the individual, but how do they build into their sessions something that helps them?
Yeah, well, look, I would say there's 3 things here. Number one, it starts with session design, and you might build into a session design certain tasks, create certain conditions for players, and build certain tasks for specific players that require them to experience different things on the pitch. So, for instance, when I worked with a Premier League side the last few seasons, I was mainly based in the medical department, but I was allowed to come out and watch and give some feedback to the coaching staff after the training session. And one of the players who they felt didn't compete at a high enough intensity level, and they wanted him to work harder on the pitch and just improve his little movements on and off the ball. In a small-sided game, they made him the spare man. If that makes sense, you'd understand that as a coach. So a spare man with a different color bib on, and so he would play for both sides. So it would require him to constantly work hard. I think if I reflect back, it was more around he would also switch off a little bit from the game. So they wanted to work on his movement, yes, from a technical standpoint, but his intensity and his capacity to constantly stay activated, as we'd say in sports psychology, intensity, mental intensity. So they made him a spare man. So he was always, the demands on him were to always be available, always make yourself available to both sides. Brilliant. You're getting him to experience what you want him to do on the pitch. So you're not just telling him, you're getting him to experience that. And that's coaching 101, isn't it? It's basic coaching. But, you can do that with relation to the mental side of the game as well. But look, clearly session design matters. Helping players have individual tasks. If you're involved in soccer and this is where it becomes tough at grassroots level because of a lack of time. But if you have the opportunity to co-create objectives with players, ask them to come up with things that they want to work on themselves, perhaps guide them, co-create these things, and where you can monitor that, where you can build that in, that's useful as well. Build it into your session design. So I think session design matters, building in individual conditions helps. Some people don't like the word empower, but let's use it. Empowering players to come up with their own objectives would be a second thing. And I talk a bit about that at the beginning of Soccer Tough 2, again, creating your own training script, I call it. And then a third thing for coaches would be, coaching on the run. Which is both an art and a science, the ability to help individual players and not just the team on the run. And that's where there's a challenging, the challenge there is helping players and the team experience practicing with intensity, and yet at the same time maybe slowing things down, even stopping things, and you might address individuals about certain behaviors on the pitch. So coaching on the run is a real art, but obviously you can individually coach then as well. So I don't think I'm saying anything there that coaches don't know about, but those are the three obvious ways to do it. It's just practicing that and reflecting on it. And one last thing I'd like to say there, and it relates to my own podcast, the Sports Psych Show. I interviewed Dr. Amy Whitehead, who's based at Liverpool John Moores University, and she isn't pioneered, but very much promotes and is very much at the forefront of a coaching practice called Think Aloud. And as the name suggests, it's basically coaches recording themselves. We've got all kinds of recording devices now, and using that, so recording yourself and commentating to yourself about what you're doing and about what you're experiencing, and then afterwards playing that back, reflecting on it, learning from it. Because what we know about reflection is when you reflect after the event, you can experience a lot of biases. When you actually can play back what you were reflecting on in the event, within the training session, you're actually getting a great degree of accuracy about what you were experiencing. So something like the Think Aloud, I thoroughly recommend listening to that podcast episode for coaches who are listening in, because it's a great little tool to help you be a better coach of your team and the individuals within your team.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely get people to check that out. So are there any common mistakes that you see coaches make with their teams that affect, whether it's being in training or on a match day, the confidence or the performance that their team put out?
I think there's a lot of common mistakes that I suppose coaches might make. Without sounding critical, I mean, I think every coach and every sports psychologist, we're all trying to improve and get better. And I think I dare say everything is littered with mistakes at all times. I think that especially when you're dealing with human beings, and I think the biggest challenge, if we take game day, you could also relate this to training, the biggest challenge is individual differences. In so many aspects of soccer coaching. I can think of the challenge of speaking to the group on game day. You've got to remember that whether you're talking with 11 players or 15 players, part of the squad or 18 players in the squad in that changing room before the game, you've got a bunch of players with different needs, wants, hopes, doubts, beliefs, expectations, values. You've got a bunch of players who activate themselves in different ways, who have different types of game faces, if you like. And not everybody is the same. And I think incumbent on coaches is developing the capacity to coach, to help players individually prepared to play. And for example, not everybody, that idea of getting people up for the game. Well, players get ready for the game in their own different way. And I think what historically I've experienced, and I've been in some pretty, good changing rooms with some pretty good players and well-regarded and well-known coaches and managers. And it does tend to be a little bit same. I think we kind of expect that, come on, and the shouts and the screams and a little bit one-dimensional there. And I would say that every player is different, and we have to bear that in mind and don't be too obsessed with, or worried by it. I have coaches who might experience this a lot. Coaches come up to me before games and gone, "Dan, it's really quiet in the change room today." And it's like, well, just stop. Don't worry. Let's not add 2 and 2 together and make 5 here. And I think that comes back to having great conversations with players, individual players, and saying, well, how can I help you on game day? How can I help you get activated in the right way, become focused in the right way? What have we got to do here? And that's where having mental frameworks really helps. So there's loads of directions I can take here, but that's one thing I would say is appreciate the individuality, the individual nature of competitive play, and don't be too worried about trying to get the team up for it. Just focus on the individual there. Maybe when you deliver your team talks, do so more around the game model. And then going to each individual and reminding them of reinforcing what they've got to do as an individual to be ready to play from a mental perspective, to take charge of themselves. That would be one thing I can think of right now.
That resonates a lot with me, because as a player, I was very much one that was, I wasn't shouting and screaming. I'd go into myself and quiet. Really, that was how I prepared more. And then you would get quite a few coaches who didn't understand that and thought you just weren't ready for the game because you weren't screaming and shouting. So I definitely resonate with the message that you're saying there.
And it can damage you, can't it? Because you kind of feel socially you're forced into going, come on. And it's just like, I'm not and that takes you away from your ideal. The horrible term we use in sports psychology is arousal level. So, or a better ideal performance state. I just think it's HPM. In your HPM, Elliot, you're different to somebody else, and he or she is different to somebody else. It's just recognizing the individual nature of it.
Yeah. Do you work with, because obviously I know from an education point of view, you would be working with coaches so they understand how to incorporate this into their sessions, into their dressing rooms. But do you ever work with coaches for themselves? So to work on their mindset and how they handle situations and doubts and fears?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that, I when I was lead psych for England rugby for a bit, I worked under Eddie Jones, and obviously a native Aussie, and we're very, very highly regarded over here in the UK, and the work that he's doing with England rugby. And I found a head coach who was really, really, really not just passionate, but actually quite brutal about his coaching staff having an individual development program for them as coaches. That's one of the things I think that sets him apart from other coaches that I've experienced, is that, he was really, really strong, and obviously still is, on that. One could argue maybe to the point of, do his coaches have too many things to think about? Maybe. I mean, there's a sweet spot there, and again, there's individual difference there. But the reason why I'm answering it like that is, I think coaches need to develop themselves, and part of that is the human experience. Part of that is helping them to manage themselves, manage their worries and doubts and stresses and strains and anxieties and needs and wants and hopes, etc., etc. So, coaches are human too. So that can be as obvious as, say, having their own coach face on game day, and on game day, it can be helping them manage themselves as they coach on the run, and be better able to deal with their behaviors, both in training practice and on game day, and just helping them manage themselves day to day, and just have a sense of balance in life. So absolutely, I'd be working with coaches all the time on that side of things.
So you said that you've worked pretty much across all levels of football in England. So I'm assuming non-league up to obviously the Premier and international. Do you find any differences between what the players are thinking or experiencing between those levels, or is it quite similar?
I think, I hate to dwell on this notion of individual, but I think that, and complexity, it's quite a complex landscape out there. I mean, I think the first thing to say there is, I'm not a sports psychologist, and I don't think there's any, good qualified sports psychologist who would start punching the air and say, we can all achieve anything. The reality is there are some players out there who have so much skill in their feet, essentially, if we're talking soccer here, who they're just damn good. They're just really, really good soccer players. That's the reality of it. And they get to the top level because they're just better than other players. And sometimes they're that good that they get away with poor thinking. However, do I think if they actually worked on this side of the game, combined with their ability, I think, wow, how much better they can be. But there's clearly some players who play Premier League, La Liga, League One, Serie A, etc., who are just that good that they get away with.
Yeah.
However, we're in the business of optimizing how good somebody can be. We've got to ask the question, how good can I be? And the answer is we just don't know. Talent ultimately comes down to the capacity to adapt as a consequence of practice and training. So those, talent is essentially, I'm practicing, I'm training, I'm playing, and I'm just getting better as a consequence of that. And some people go like that really quick. Other people go like that. Okay. Some people go like that. So, the people who go like that, it might slow down, but can we keep it going like that so they get better and better and better? I think that, what I've experienced in lower leagues is there are some players who have a great deal of ability, but for some reason have a certain sensitivity to certain negative psychological characteristics, if you like, that prevent them from getting the most from their ability, or prevent them from improving to the point that could help them play at a higher level. And so it's about uncovering that. There's some players who are really, really good, but don't deal with the pressure of game. There are some players who are really, really good, but perhaps have distractions off the pitch that don't help them. You can probably think of a number of things. So definitely, I think that there are players in lower league who are playing. I've always said there's a lot playing. There's a hell of a lot who play a division below the division that they can play in. There's quite a few who are playing a couple of divisions below. And there are absolutely some who might be playing 3 divisions below where they should be. So there's definitely players who in England play in League 2 who could be 3 divisions higher in the Premier League. There are definitely some who could play Championship, and there's definitely some who can play in League 1. But it's multidimensional. The reality is there's going to be some players in, say, non-leagues who just don't have that explosiveness, who no matter how good they think, are potentially, can they train to get that explosiveness? Maybe, maybe not. But as one player said to me, actually, he was a coach. I said, because he'd played Premier League. But he wasn't a stunning Premier League player. He'd got to that level and played a bit there and then came down a bit. I said, what was the difference between yourself? What did you feel like when you were on the pitch and you were playing the very best players? And it's funny, he mentioned Gareth Barry, actually. I said, who's one of the best players you played against? And he said, Gareth Barry. I was like, okay, right. Very good player, England player, right? But not necessarily somebody that you would... He said him, because he was just a few steps ahead, real game intelligence. But he said, when I went on a pitch, and he said, I played against a Paul Pogba type character. He said, the thing about it is, he said, within a split second, he's 4 meters ahead of you.
Yeah.
And I, as a sports psychologist, have to recognize that as well. That there's an explosiveness and a physicality involved that sports psychology can't necessarily give you or deliver on. It might be that you can play, sports psychology can help you with the cognitive side of playing more game intelligent. So to search for clues, etc., that helps you be more like Gareth Barry, and helps you with that, and helps you in that way to think ahead and be in the right position. So there's that side of things. But there's definitely a physicality that some players might not be able to accommodate that helps them get better. I think that's a fascinating landscape. Some players just can't get around the pitch like some of the best, like a Mane, for instance, who must be just scary explosive. But
I think it's also good for our younger players to realize that, when they look up to these Premier League players, international players, a lot of people think they've got everything figured out, and it just comes easy and it's natural and they don't have to work on it. Whereas actual fact, everybody's human. Everybody has their own inner voice, inner dialogue that's, trying to pull them back down, and their own doubts and fears. So it's all about acknowledging that and then working on it to try and quieten that noise as much as possible.
I think that's really well said, Elliot. And I think that, absolutely, even the very best players, in the world, when they need to think better. I can assure you, there's just not a player out there who doesn't need a competitive mental framework just to help them. And I want to be clear, just coming back to that physicality, for young players listening in, don't think for 1 minute I'm saying that from a negative standpoint. If anything, I'm saying when you do your speed, agility, and quickness, Over the years, it frustrates me incredibly, and I understand why this happens, but it frustrates me incredibly seeing players go through the motions with the speed, agility, and quickness stuff. When nowadays you've got so many good strength and conditioning coaches, you've got so many good sports scientists who are trying to help players take players through really good speed, agility, and quickness stuff. If you're a young player, do that stuff and do it thoroughly and try to get every millisecond you can out of your game. That makes a big, big difference, and to see 13-year-olds, 14, 15, 16-year-olds who have ambition, and even older players, 17, 18, 19, 20, because I don't think it completely closes off. At that age, it becomes harder to make a difference there, but you need every millisecond you can. And that's where pay attention to those things.
Yeah.
Do that properly. Because when you come up and you're playing against Bappy, or you're playing against Pogba, or you're playing against these very dynamic midfielders, if they're there and you're here, you just want to be here. And then if you can think a little bit about seeing more and play more game 10, you might be here. That's going to make a big difference to your capacity in your career.
Yeah. And that, again, touches on what we said before about the intentional training, not just going through the motions and really focusing on what it is you're doing and trying to achieve from it.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned age there. Is there maybe a lower age or maybe an upper age where you think, like, is there an age that's just too young for you to start working on this, or when should you start working on your mind? Or is there like an upper age where you think, it's too late now, you're kind of fixed, you're set in stone?
It's never too late. Players in their 30s, absolutely. So to the day you retire, if we're talking about the adult elite level, you can work on your mindset. I've worked with players in their last year of their career because they want to get the most out of that year. So it's never too late. Look, in terms of young players, I mean, there's so much controversy at the moment about, what philosophies coaches take with young players. Do we engage them in, at what age does a young player start taking the game seriously, in inverted commas? What does that look like? How do we engage them in free play? We're not, I think globally we're not good enough at the moment in engaging on players in just free play. Here's a ball, here's a bunch of cones for goals or whatever. Just go out and play with your mates and sort yourself out, and I'll be here as a coach, and I'm here to support as and when you need me, type thing. And free play is important. It's recognizing that young players at the age of 8 engaged in free play will be developing on the mental side of the game just naturally. That's important to say. I certainly, as a sports psychologist, if you're asking me that question as a sports psychologist, I certainly don't engage players under the age of 12. If I get an email through and a parent says, my 10-year-old wants to be a Premier League player and blah, 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 then I'd rather work with the parent and help the parent in terms of, here's some very simple tools and techniques. Here's a game face, which I think a 10-year-old can have, but then helping the parent understand, like, whoa, calm down. This is a 10-year-old here. Okay, we don't have to go down that path. Let's just let the 10-year-old enjoy this here. I think coaches of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds absolutely need to be students of the mental side of the game. Because that's a period of time where young people are starting to learn about the world around them, and they're starting to learn about the agency. We call it agency in psychology, the goals that other human beings have, and how we deal with that on a social level. So absolutely, coaches need to know about the mental side of the game and deliver appropriately there. Again, I think an 8-year-old can have a fun game face. An 8-year-old can squash ants. I don't think there's anything wrong or unethical about that. Do I think I should stand in front of a bunch of 8-year-olds delivering psychology? No, I don't. if I have a 13 or 14-year-old contact me, or parent, and I'll say, I'd like to do a session with the 13-year-old and the parent. That's how I would do that. Anybody over 14 years old, then, I think you're getting into a territory. If a 14, 15-year-old says, I really want to take this seriously. This is really important to me. I've been playing and practicing since I've been 6. I love it. I want to see how good I can get. Then I have no problem me being involved in some capacity. Even then, it's the system around the player. Even then, it's the parental attitude, how they're being involved, what they're reinforcing. It's the coaching staff in and around that player. And even then, from a systemic perspective, I'd like a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old to be rational about their involvement in the game. It's a tough landscape, and it's enormously complex, and there's so many different opinions, of which are very, very emotive. What is a childhood? What are the rights of children? What's the best way for children to engage in soccer? How should they participate? How do we help develop lifelong participants? These are complex things. And I don't think there's an answer. However, I'd like to think what I've drawn out there gives you some indication about how I think about it. I don't think we have to dismiss the notion of children having ambition in the game. And again, I was talking with Professor Mark Williams about this on the Sports Psych show a few weeks ago, which I promote to any coach to listen to. Professor Mark Williams is one of the world's leading experts in sports science, in various departments of sports science. He's just written a book and talks about this, and talks about early specialization versus late specialization, talks about diversification, playing diverse sets of sports rather than specializing in a single sport. Early to the game, late to the game, clocking up amount of hours. There's evidence to suggest that players who go on and have a career in the game have actually clocked up a few thousand hours prior to the age of 9. And that's not to do with the 10,000 hour rule. Okay, that's a separate thing. So there is evidence to suggest that young players have played a lot before the age of 9 and 10. But that could be play in free play, and there's still players who go on and have a career in the game who haven't clocked up those hours. So it's a very complex landscape. So we've got to be very careful about what we talk about. But I think ethically, one has to consider what one is doing as a coach or parent when engaging young people in sport.
Yeah, I think the parents are, obviously a big influence to giving them some education on how they can be handling situations and experiences that the kids are going through is definitely only going to be a benefit for the youngster, I think, really. So we had I was going to say we had some kind of fun question come in, but there is probably something more to it than just a bit of fun. But had someone ask around superstitions and what your thoughts were around them. So things like, players putting on a certain shin pad before the other, or one boot before the other, walking out change rooms last, or even you see it a lot in like cup finals where players won't look or touch the trophy as they walk past. Like, do you think there's a lot in the superstitions? Is it a good thing or a negative thing to have? Is for the trophy, for example, for a player, is touching it maybe thinking they're going to lose some hunger to actually try and win that trophy if they've touched it already prior to winning it?
Yeah, I think first thing to say here is that there are, from a serious perspective, there are religious symbols that players might use, and there's religious practices that players might engage in that that can be associated with this. And always, I, as a sports psychologist, and I think coaches have to be sensitive to that, because those become very meaningful when they attach them to performance. Is that right? Is that wrong? Look, I'm not going to go down that path of critiquing that. What I would say, if it's a simple thing as I have to wear my yellow socks underneath my club socks. I have to put one sock on first. I have to be last out the change room, whatever that is. I would always say to athletes, be careful. Really, what we want are routines rather than superstitions. Mm-hmm. We want to engage in behaviors that we know relate to the behaviors we want on the pitch and relate to the specific challenges we have on the pitch or the field, the court or the course. So I would always look to help competitors build in routines that bear relation to what we want on the pitch or the field, rather than something that feels a little bit separate from that and isn't completely linked. So I think I don't think you can just dive in and go, well, don't do that because it's ridiculous. I just think it's about engaging for me personally, where I can, I will engage with a player and ask questions. And if I feel it's appropriate, I might challenge them on it. Or I will just go, okay, fine, no problem at all. And what are you doing from a routine perspective that's helping you attain the right mindset? And we might work on a game face and HPM and look to build that into things. And if we're going to relate it to the superstition, fine. And or we slowly start to get rid of that superstition and aim it more towards tangible behaviors that help players get into that high performance mindset and help them execute the responsibilities in their role within that high performance mindset. That's how I would answer that. Simple.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know we've been clocked up probably just over an hour now, so thank you very much. Before we sign off, I know you're on Twitter. I follow you on there. So anywhere else that you may be, and give us your handles, your websites. I'm sure I've seen that you have an online academy as well. So anywhere people can find you, hear you, podcast, work with you, please let us know.
No worries. Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me on, Elliot. It's been an honor and a delight to chat with you. Let's start with my website, danabrahams.com. danabrahams.com, and there's a blog on there with some articles. There's links to my books, which you can get on Amazon and other stores. I think in Australia, Barnes & Noble is a big one. There is, as you say, an online academy, which is packed full of videos and email support. And if you get in there quickly at the moment, it's still on offer at £49 for a year's membership. And there's a whole bunch of videos for players and coaches and parents to work together on the mental side of the game. But that can work as a standalone program for coaches or for players or for parents. And what else? So Twitter, my main soccer handle is @DanAbrahams77. @DanAbrahams77. I'm posting a little article each day on LinkedIn and Facebook, and you can see that on Facebook @DanAbrahamsSoccer. @DanAbrahamsSoccer. My Instagram is @DanAbrahamsSport. @DanAbrahamsSport. And finally, my podcast, which I'm proud to say I think is one of the most downloaded sports psychology podcasts out there. We've had over 500,000 downloads now in a couple of years, and that's the Sports Psych Show. So if you just Google the Sports Psych Show, and you can get that on iTunes and all other good Android platforms. And I think that's, I've got a couple more Twitters, but that's golf and the Sports Psych Show. So I think that's it.
Fantastic. You're a very busy man. Lots of things to remember and manage there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we can catch up soon.
No worries. Thank you, Elliot.